15:1. As time went on, Absalom took to riding in a horse-drawn chariot with 50 men running in front of him. Early each morning, he would take up his post beside the road at the city gate. When anyone showed up with a case to bring up for the king for a decision, Absalom would call them over and say, "Where do you hail from?" And the answer would come, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say, "Look, you got a strong case, but the king isn't going to listen to you." Then he'd say, "Why didn't someone make me judge for this country? Anybody with a case could bring it into me and I'd settle things fair and square." Whenever someone would treat him with special honor, he'd shrug it off and treat him like an equal, making him feel important. Absalom did this to everyone who came to do business with the king and stole the hearts of everyone in Israel. After 4 years of this, Absalom spoke to the king, "Let me go to Hebron to pay a vow that I made to God. Your servant made a vow when I was living in Geshur and Aram. If God will bring me back to Jerusalem, I'll serve him with my life." The king said, "Go with my blessing," and he got up and set off for Hebron. Then Absalom sent undercover agents to all the tribes of Israel with the message, "When you hear the blast of the ram's horns, trumpet, that's your signal. Shout, Absalom is king in Hebron." 200 men went with Absalom from Jerusalem, but they had been called together, knowing nothing of the plot, and made the trip innocently. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he managed also to involve Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's advisor, calling him away from his hometown in Gilo. The conspiracy grew powerful, and Absalom's supporters multiplied. Someone came to David with the report, "The whole country is taken up with Absalom." "Up and out of here," called David to all the servants who were with him in Jerusalem. "We've got to run for our lives, or none of us will escape Absalom. Hurry. He's about to pull the city down with our ears and slaughter us all." The king's servant said, "Whatever our master the king says, we'll do. We're all the way." So the king and his entire household escaped on foot. The king left 10 concubines behind to tend the palace. David just goes from bad to worse. "And so they left step by step, and paused at the last house as the whole army passed by him. All the Kerethites, all the Pelethites, and the 600 Gittites who had marched with him from Gath went past. The king called out to Ittai the Gittite, 'What are you doing here? Go back with King Absalom. You're a stranger here and freshly uprooted from your own country. You arrived only yesterday, and I'm going to let you take your chances with us as I live on the road like a gypsy. Go back and take your family with you, and God's grace and truth go with you.' But Ittai answered, 'As God lives and my master the king lives, where my master is, that's where I'll be, and whether it means life or death.' 'All right,' said David, 'go ahead.' They went on, Ittai the Gittite with all his men and all the children he had with him. The whole country was weeping in loud lament as all the people passed by. As the king crossed the brook Kidron, the army headed for the road to the wilderness. Zadok was there also, the Levites with him carrying God's chest of the covenant. They set the chest of God down, Abiathar standing by until all the people had evacuated the city. Then the king ordered Zadok, 'Take the chest back to the city. If I get back in God's good graces, he'll bring me back and show me where the chest has been set down. But if he says I'm not pleased with you, well, he can do with me whatever he pleases.' The king directed Zadok the priest, 'Here's the plan. Return to the city peacefully with Ahimaaz your son and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, with you. I'll wait at a spot in the wilderness across the river until I get word from you telling us what's up.' So Zadok and Abiathar took the chest of God back to Jerusalem and placed it there while David went up to the Mount of Olives, weeping, head covered but barefooted, and the whole army was with him, heads covered and weeping as they ascended. David was told Ahithophel has joined the conspirators with Absalom. He prayed, 'Oh God, turn Ahithophel's counsel to foolishness.' As David approached the top of the hill where God was worshipped, Hushai the Archite, clothes ripped to shreds and dirt on his head, was there waiting for him. David said, 'If you come with me, you'll be just one more piece of luggage. Go back to the city and say to Absalom, I'm ready to be your servant, O king. I used to be your father's servant, now I'm your servant. Do that, and you'll be able to confuse Ahithophel's counsel for me. The priests Zadok and Abiathar are already there. Whatever information you pick up in the palace, tell them. Their 2 sons, Zadok, son of Ahimaaz, and Abiathar's son Jonathan, are there with them. Anything you pick up can be sent to me by them.' Hushai, David's friend, arrived at the same time Absalom was entering Jerusalem." 2 Samuel 16. Shortly after David passed the crest of the hill, Mephibosheth's steward Ziba met him with a string of pack animals, saddled and loaded with 100 loaves of bread, 100 raisin cakes, 100 baskets of fresh fruit, and a skin of wine. The king said to Ziba, "What's all this?" "The donkeys," said Ziba, "are for the king's household to ride, the bread and fruit are for the servants to eat, and the wine is for drinking, especially for those overcome by fatigue in the wilderness." The king said, "And where's your master's grandson?" "Oh, he stayed in Jerusalem," said Ziba. "He said, 'This is the day Israel is going to restore my grandfather's kingdom to me.'" "You lying wonder." Everything that belonged to Mephibosheth, said the king, is now yours. Ziba said, how can I ever thank you? I'll be forever in your debt, my master and king. May you always look on me with such kindness. You devil, you. You devil. When the king got to Bahurim, a man appeared who had connections with Saul's family. His name was Shimei, son of Gera. As he followed along, he shouted insults and threw rocks right and left at David and his company and servants and soldiers alike. To the company of curses, he shouted, get lost, you butcher, you hellbound. God has paid you back for all your dirty work in the family of Saul and for stealing his kingdom. God has given the kingdom to your son Absalom. Look at you now, ruined. And good riddance, you pathetic old man. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, this mangy dog can't insult my master, the king, this way. Let me go over and cut off his head. But the king said, why are you, sons of Zeruiah, always interfering and getting in the way? If he's cursing, it's because God told him, curse David. So who dares raise questions? Besides, continued David to Abishai and the rest of his servants, my flesh and bone is right now trying to kill me. Compared to that, this Benjamite is small potatoes. Don't bother with him. Let him curse. He's preaching God's word to me. And who knows, maybe God will see the trouble I'm in today and exchange the curses for something good. David and his men went down the road while Shimei followed along on the road of the hill alongside, cursing and throwing stones down on them and kicking up dirt. By the time they reached the Jordan River, David and all the men of the company were exhausted. They rested and were revived. By this time, Absalom and all his men were in Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. Soon after, Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came and greeted Absalom. Long live the king! Long live the king! Absalom said to Hushai, is this the way you show devotion to your good friend? Why didn't you go with your friend David? Because, said Hushai, I want to be with the person that God and his people and all Israel have chosen. I want to stay with him. Besides, who is there to serve other than the son? Just as I served your father, I'm now ready to serve you. Then Absalom spoke to Ahithophel, are you ready to give counsel? What do we do next? Ahithophel told Absalom, go and sleep with your father's concubines, the ones he left to tend the palace. Everyone will hear that you've openly disgraced your father, and the morale of everyone on your side will be strengthened. So Absalom pitched a tent up on the roof in public view and went in and slept with his father's concubines. The counsel that Ahithophel gave in those days was treated as if God himself had spoken. That was the reputation of Ahithophel's counsel to David. It was the same with Absalom. 2 Samuel 17. Next Ahithophel advised Absalom, let me handpick 12,000 men and go after David tonight. I'll come on him when he's bone tired and take him by complete surprise. The whole army will run off and I'll kill only David. Then I'll bring the army back to you, a bride brought back to her husband. You're only after one man after all, and everyone will be together in peace. Absalom thought it was an excellent strategy, and all the elders of Israel agreed. But then Absalom said, call in Hushai the Archite. Let's hear what he has to say. So Hushai came, and Absalom put it to him. This is what Ahithophel advised. Should we do it? What do you say? Hushai said, the counsel that Ahithophel is given in this instance is not good. You know your father and his men, brave and bitterly angry, like a bear robbed of her cubs. And your father's an experienced fighter. You can be sure he won't be caught napping at a time like this. Even while we're talking, he's probably holed up in some cave or other. If he jumps your men from ambush, word will get back soon. A slaughter of Absalom's army. Even if your men are valiant with hearts of lions, they'll fall apart at such news. For everyone in Israel knows the kind of fighting stuff your father's made of, and also the men with him. Here's what I advise. Muster the whole country from Dan to Beersheba, an army like the sand of the sea, and you personally lead them. We'll smoke him out wherever he is, fall on him like dew falls on the earth, and believe me, there won't be a single survivor. If he hides out in a city, then the whole army will bring ropes to that city and pull it down and into a gully, not so much as a pebble of it. Absalom and all his country agreed that the counsel of Hushai the Archite was better than the counsel of Ahithophel. God had determined to discredit the counsel of Ahithophel so as to bring ruin on Absalom. Then Hushai told the priests Zadok and Abiathar, Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel thus, and I advised him thus and thus. Now send this message as quickly as possible to David. Don't spend the night on this side of the river. Cross immediately, or the king and everyone with him will be swallowed up alive. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting around it in Rogel. A servant girl would come and give them messages, and then they would go and tell King David. For it wasn't safe to be seen coming into the city. But a soldier spotted them and told Absalom. So the two of them got out there fast and went to a man's house in Bahurim. He had a well in his yard, and they climbed into it. The wife took a rug and covered the well, then spread grain over it so no one would notice anything out of the ordinary. Shortly, Absalom's servants came to the woman's house and asked her, have you seen Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman said they were headed toward the river. They looked but didn't find them, then went back to Jerusalem. When the coast was clear, Ahimaaz and Jonathan climbed out of the well and went on to make report to King David. Go up and cross the river quickly. Ahithophel has given counsel against you. David and his whole army were soon up, moving and crossed the Jordan. As morning broke, there was not a single person who had not made it across the Jordan. When Ahithophel realized that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey, left for his hometown, and making out his will and putting his house in order, he hanged himself and died. He was buried in the family tomb. About that time, that's what you get for being a Judas. So Judas in the New Testament hung himself, and Judas in the Old Testament did the same thing. About the time David arrived at Mahanaim, Absalom crossed the Jordan and the whole army of Israel with him. Absalom had made Amasa head of the army, replacing Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra, an Ishmaelite who had married Abigail, daughter of Naashah, the sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. Israel and Absalom set up camp in Gilead. When David arrived at Mahanaim, Shobai, son of Nahash, from Ammonite Rabbah, and Machir from Email from Lodebar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Rogelim brought beds and blankets, bowls and jugs filled with wheat, barley, flour, roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, and cheese from the flocks and herds. They presented all this to David and his army to eat, because they said the army must be starved and exhausted and thirsty out in this wilderness. 2 Samuel 18. David organized his forces. He appointed captains of thousands and captains of hundreds. Then David deployed his troops, a third under Joab, a third under Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. Then the king announced, I'm marching with you. They said, no, you mustn't march with us. If we're forced to retreat, the enemy won't give it a second thought. And if half of us die, they won't do so either. But you're worth 10,000 of us. It will be better for us if you stay in the city and help from there. If you say so, said the king, I'll do what you think is best. And he stood beside the city gate, as the whole army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. Then the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. The whole army heard what the king commanded the three captains regarding Absalom. The army took to the field to meet Israel. It turned out that the battle was joined in the forest of Ephraim. The army of Israel was beaten badly there that day by David's men, a terrific slaughter, 20,000 men. There was dazed and confused fighting all over the place. The forest claimed more lives that day than the sword. Absalom ran into David's men, but was out in front of them riding his mule, when the mule ran under the branches of a huge oak tree. Absalom's head was caught in the oak, and he was left dangling between heaven and earth, the mule running right out from under him. A solitary soldier saw him and reported it to Joab. I just saw Absalom hanging from an oak tree. Joab said to the man who told him, if you saw him, why didn't you kill him then and there? I'd have rewarded you with 10 pieces of silver and a fancy belt. The man told Joab, even if I'd had a chance of 1,000 pieces of silver, I wouldn't have laid hands on the king's son. We all heard the king's command, you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake, protect the young man Absalom. Why, I'd be risking my life for nothing, is hidden from the king, and you would have just stood there. Joab said, I can't waste my time with you. He then grabbed 3 knives and stabbed Absalom in the heart while he was still alive in the tree. But weren't you the one that brought Absalom back to Jerusalem to see the king? Can't ever figure these people out. By then, Absalom was surrounded by 10 of Joab's armor bearers. They hacked away at him and killed him. Joab then blew the ram's horn trumpet, calling off the army in its pursuit of Israel. They took Absalom, dumped him into a huge pit in the forest, and piled an immense mound of rocks over him. Meanwhile, the whole army of Israel was in flight, each man making his own way home. While alive, Absalom had erected for himself a pillar in the valley of the king because, he said, I have no son to carry on my name. He inscribed the pillar with his own name. To this day, it's called the Absalom Memorial. Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, said, let me run to the king and bring him the good news that God has delivered him from his enemies. But Joab said, you're not the one to deliver the good news today. Some other day, maybe, but it's not good news today. This was because the king's son was dead. Then Joab ordered the Cushite, you go, tell the king what you've seen. Yes, sir, said the Cushite, and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, kept at it, begging Joab, what does it matter? Let me run too, following the Cushite. Joab said, why all this run, run? You'll get no thanks for it, I can tell you. I don't care, let me run. Okay, said Joab, run. So Ahimaaz ran, taking the lower valley road, and passed the Cushite. David was sitting between the two gates. The sentry had gone up on top of the gate on the wall and looked around. He saw a solitary runner. The sentry called down and told the king. The king said, if he's alone, it must be good news. As the runner came closer, the sentry saw another runner and called down to the gate, another runner all by himself. The king said, this also must be good news. Then the sentry said, I can see the first man now. He runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok. He's a good man, said the king. He's bringing good news for sure. Then Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, peace. Then he bowed down deeply before the king, his face to the ground. Blessed be your God. He has handed over the men who rebelled against my master the king. The king asked, but is the young man Absalom all right? Ahimaaz said, I saw a huge ruckus just as Joab was sending me off, but I don't know what it was about. The king said, step aside and stand over there. So he stepped aside. Then the Cushite arrived and said, good news, my master the king. God has given victory today over all those who rebelled against you. But, said the king, is the young man Absalom all right? And the Cushite replied, would that all of the enemies of my master the king and all who maliciously rose against you end up like that young man. The king was stunned, heartbroken. He went up to the room over the gate and wept. And he wept and cried out. He cried out. As he wept, he cried out, oh, my son Absalom, my dear, dear son Absalom. Why not me rather than you, my death and not yours? Oh, Absalom, my dear, dear son. 2 Samuel 19, David's grief for Absalom. Joab was told that David was weeping and lamenting over Absalom. The day's victory turned into a day of mourning as word passed through the army. David is grieving over his son. The army straggled back to the city that day demoralized, dragging their tails. And the king held his face in his hands, lamented loudly, oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my dear, dear son. But in private, Joab rebuked the king. Now you've done it. Knock the wind out of your loyal servants who have just saved your life, to say nothing of the lives of your sons and daughters, wives and concubines. What is this? Loving those who hate you and hating those who love you? Your actions give a clear message. Officers and soldiers mean nothing to you. You know that if Absalom were alive right now, we'd all be dead. Would that make you happy? Get hold of yourself. Get out of here. Put on some heart into your servants. I swear to God that if you don't go to them, they'll desert. Not a soldier will be left here by nightfall. And that would be the worst thing that has happened yet. Joab, you need to be rebuked and cut down. You're the devil. So the king came out and took his place at the city gate. Soon everyone knew, oh, look, the king has come out to receive us. And his whole army came and presented itself to the king. But the Israelites had fled the field of battle and gone home. Meanwhile, the whole populace was now complaining to its leaders. Wasn't it the king who saved us time and time again from our enemies and rescued us from the Philistines? And now he has had to flee the country on account of Absalom. And now this Absalom, who we made king, is dead in battle. So what are you waiting for? Why don't you bring the king back? When David heard what was being said, he sent word to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Ask the elders of Judah, why are you so laggard in bringing the king back home? You're my brothers. You're my own flesh and blood. So why are you the last ones to bring the king back home? And tell Amasa, you too are my flesh and blood. As God is my witness, I'm making you the permanent commander of the army in place of Joab. He captured the hearts of everyone in Judah. They were unanimous in sending for the king. Come back, you and all your servants. So the king returned. He arrived at the Jordan just as Judah reached Gilgal on their way to welcome the king and escort him across the Jordan. Even Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite for Buriam, hurried down to join the men of Judah so he could welcome the king. And aren't you the one that just cussed him out? 1,000 Benjamites with him. And Ziba, Saul's steward, with his 15 sons and 20 servants, waded across the Jordan to meet the king and brought his entourage across, doing whatever they could to make the king comfortable. You all are some two-faced people. Shimei, son of Gera, bowed down in homage to the king as soon as he was across the Jordan and said, don't think badly of me, my master. Overlook my irresponsible outburst on the day my master, the king, left Jerusalem. Don't hold it against me. I know I sinned. But look at me now, the first of all the tribe of Joseph to come down and welcome back my master, the king. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, interrupted, enough of this. Shouldn't we just kill him outright? Why, he cursed God's anointed. But David said, what is it with you sons of Zeruiah? Why do you insist on being so contentious? Aren't they always in the middle of something? Nobody's going to be killed today. I'm king over Israel. Then the king turned to Shimei. You're not going to die. And the king gave him his word. Next, Mephibosheth, grandson of Saul, arrived from Jerusalem to welcome the king. He hadn't combed his hair, trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safe and sound. The king said, and why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth? My master, the king, he said, my servant betrayed me. I told him to saddle my donkey so I could ride it and go with the king. For, as you know, I am lame. And then he lied to you about me. But my master, the king, has been like one of God's angels. He knew what was right and did it. Wasn't everyone in my father's house doomed? But you took me and gave me a place at your table. What more could I expect or ask? That's enough, said the king. Say no more. Here's my decision. You and Ziba divide the property between you? Oh, no, you need to give everything to Mephibosheth. Ziba lied. He's a liar, and the truth ain't in him. Mephibosheth said, oh, let him have it all. What? All I care about is that my master, the king, is home, safe and sound. That's too much. You all are something else. Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim. He crossed the Jordan with the king to give him a good send-off. Barzillai was a very old man, 80 years old. He had supplied the king's needs all while he was in Mahanaim, since he was very wealthy. Join me in Jerusalem, the king said to Barzillai. Let me take care of you. But Barzillai declined the offer. How long do you think I'd live if I went with the king to Jerusalem? I'm 80 years old and not much good to anyone anymore to anyone. Can't taste food, can't hear music. So why add the burdens of my master, the king? I'll just go a little way across the Jordan with the king. But why would the king need to make a great thing of that? Let me go back and die in my hometown and be buried with my father and mother. But my servant Kinham here, let him go with you in my place, but treat him well. The king said, that's settled. Kinham goes with me and I will treat him well. If you think of anything else, I'll do that for you. The army crossed the Jordan, but the king stayed. The king kissed and blessed Barzillai, who then returned home. Then the king, Kinham with him, crossed over at Gilgal. The whole army of Judah and half of the army of Israel processed with the king. I thought it was all one nation. The men of Israel came to the king and said, why have our brothers, the men of Judah, taken over as if they owned the king, escorting the king and his family and close associates across the country? The men of Judah retorted, because the king is related to us, that's why. But why make a scene? You don't see us getting treated special because of it, do you? The men of Israel shot back, we have 10 shares in the king to your 1. Besides, we're the firstborn. So why are we having to play second fiddle? That was our idea to bring him back. But the men of Judah took a harder line than the men of Israel. Division in the camp.